All right, we're going to get this underway here. Okay. So tonight is the Modern Irregular Warfare Night. Okay. And I'm going to be dealing with the some of the concepts developed by Professor Friedrich August von der Heide, who wrote a book called Modern Irregular Warfare. Now, also, I want to welcome you to the BC LaRouche chapter here in Vancouver.
November 21st.
And it is November 21st. I've just been reminded.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. All right. So we've had these events in France, Beirut, the downing of the plane over Sinai, the Mali hotel, Blue Radisson Hotel. We found out that the Chinese railway guys were the first to go in that one. This is kind of disruptive. Now tonight we will dispel any illusions people may have about international terrorism. And I'll start off with a history of international terrorism, or otherwise called modern irregular warfare, how it works, and how to defeat it. Oh, by the way, some people call it, the British have another term for it, they call it low-intensity operations. And then I will go into the global context of this situation with terrorism and its intentions. And then we will interpret the actions of Putin in particular, and the LaRouche movement also, and others in this context. And last, I'll go through the opportunity that presents us of how potentially a devastating blow can now be delivered to the power that is running this these terrorist operations. So basically, my presentation is partly based on a book by Professor Friedrich August von der Heide, Modern Irregular Warfare. It was originally published in the German version in 1968, and then it was translated and published by the LaRouche movement in English in 1986. The book is very technical and very detailed, and I will only just deal with a few of the concepts. This book was written for military personnel. It was not a book written for, it's very dry reading, and it's not a book written for it was a very technical book in terms of how to look at it. Now, and I consider this book to be the main handbook for how you defeat international terrorism, how you defeat irregular warfare, and these sort of things. Now, the first thing I'm going to deal with is this term modern irregular warfare. What modern means is that is post-World War II, in the period of nuclear arsenals. That is the difference prior to World War II. The post-World War II period is the nuclear age, nuclear warfare age. The pre-World War II period is not a nuclear war age, and therefore the modern means in the post-nuclear warfare age. What modern means is that all military conflict now has to occur below the threshold of all-out conventional warfare, like World War I or World War II or the Civil War in the United States, which was the first major modern conventional war, World War I, World War II. These are huge wars in which populations are being decimated, in which you have hundreds of thousands of troops and artillery and planes in some cases, in the latter cases. this is all-out war, and like the Civil War was all-out war, World War I was all-out war, World War II was all-out war. These things cannot occur anymore without causing an all-out war with nuclear weapons. Therefore, all military activity has to occur below the threshold of a nuclear war, and it can occur in two forms: irregular war, terrorism, low-intensity operations, as the British call it, or small proxy wars. That is, wars that are contained within a small area, like relatively small area like Vietnam or Afghanistan or some other place, which are proxy wars. Okay, that's the only kind of warfare that you can have, and without it going all the way to a nuclear war. So this means that a significant amount of the preponderance of military activity is shifted to covert operations, to things that are covert operations, special operations, things of that nature. Also supporting guerrilla groups, supporting Islamic terrorist groups, supporting other kinds of terrorist groups, using proxies, and so forth and so on. This becomes the mechanism of warfare. Now all of this actually developed during the Cold War between the US bloc and the Soviet bloc. And things would be used like guerrilla movements, and there would be covert operations between the Russians and the Americans, or NATO and Warsaw Pact. There would be all kinds of things going on for power struggles in developing countries, and so forth and so on. And then the British developed a whole series of these things to use in Africa especially, which they use in other places, like in Kenya. There's a very special kind of British versions of these things. Now, second, I got to say this to you. There is no such thing as an insurgency, a terrorist operation, low-intensity operations, groups that you hear in the media that are running either low-intensity operations or are terrorist groups. There is no such thing that exists as an independent entity or a sociological phenomenon. It exists only in the context of proxy wars, and it exists only in the context of state sponsors or equivalent of state sponsors. You do not have independent terrorist movements per se. You do have, in some parts of the world, you have indigenous resistance movements, but they are they're somewhat contained unless they are supported in a very big way outside of that. In other words, they're somewhat contained within the structure. But now, so that's one dimension of it. Now, the purpose of terrorism or modern irregular warfare is to affect a number of possible outcomes. But the primary effect, the primary means to affect a number of possible outcomes is to wear down an opponent by targeting their defenseless population to acts of violence. Now, it doesn't necessarily cause a lot of casualties, but it causes a lot of effect because it maintains a tension of you don't know when it's going to happen next. And this may be done to cause a regime change, or it may be done from the standpoint of creating a police state structure and putting that into place. And the war against terrorism becomes a mechanism for the political existence of the police state. The British also see this as a way of demoralizing the population to create political and psychological conditions in the population of increasing disillusionment and demoralization and despair, a loss of confidence in their institutions. And also, the British have done the psychological studies which demonstrate that if you have low intensity operations, the population, and there's no resolution of it, the population regresses psychologically. And the use of mass media to highlight these things on a mass scale creates a psychological regression in the population because they feel defenseless. They feel their government isn't effective, or it just has a demoralizing effect. Now, so you have two different kinds of things. You have proxy wars, and then you have actual targeting entire population for demoralization. Okay, so they're somewhat different, but the instrumentality is the use of the media, the use of the terrorism, and so forth. But none of this is independent. None of this is happening on its own. So now there's another form of this which took place in Kenya. It's very famous. It's the Mau Mau case, where you had a anti-colonial rebellion led by Jomo Kenyatta and led by the Mau Mau in Kenya. And what the British did is they set up a counter Mau Mau that you could not distinguish them from the Mau Mau, and they went around terrorizing the civilian population, and thereby created a problem in the population where they didn't know if they were actually working with the Mau Mau or working with the British-run so-called Mau Mau, and it created massive confusion. And this was done by Frank Kitson, and this is sort of one of the early. This was in the 50s, and this is sort of one of the textbook cases of counterinsurgency, of using terror as a form of counterinsurgency, using counter-terror and terror as a form of counterinsurgency. So let's say you have an opposition group, you create a phony opposition group, which they did this in South Africa. It was called the Third Force. It messed up the whole situation in South Africa until they were able to deal with it. It's where they had violence being done by a force that was outside of the structure, and so this is one of the British methods. And so a lot of this terrorist stuff has also been a lot of the ideas involved have been used in counterinsurgency, so-called counterinsurgency. You know, you have an insurgency, now you have a counterinsurgency, and nobody knows who's who and what's what. And then the idea is you terrorize the population, you terrorize the population, so that they don't know who's who, who's what, and they basically shut down, and that's the end of whatever insurgency you're dealing with. Or if you're trying to overthrow a government, you use terrorism in that respect. Now, the actual strategies which are used by irregular warfare, in the case of a government which is under attack, it's to force the government of a nation to overdeploy and cause collateral damage in their overdeployment to the point of increasing recruits to the terrorist cause. So this is you create it so that the government doesn't know where it is. It massively deploys its forces. Its forces go all over the place. There's collateral damage, and then the effect of the collateral damage is the potential for new recruits to the terrorist movement or to the insurgency. it also causes the government to spend enormous amounts of resources to defend itself for hypothetical threats that could come from here, that could come from there. It could be a ship coming in, it could be a plane, it could be this, it could be that, it could be any number of things. You got to have this massive security apparatus. And the other thing is to create massive fear in the population, such that the population feels like it's under permanent state of siege, and they'll do anything to relieve that condition. Now, so now we get to the structure of a terrorist, the terrorist structure. First and foremost, the controlling entity for the terrorist or in terrorist movements such as the ones we're talking about is located in a safe place, a safe place, a safe center where the recruitment and the as well as the command structure is. The command structure is never per se at the point where there's combatants. The combatants are at the bottom of the whole structure. The control and direction is going on in most cases outside the area of combat. It's going on. And London has traditionally been the center and headquarters for most of the terrorist movements in the world, where they would say, well, you know, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, or one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and they would have their offices in London, you know, and they would recruit out of London. They would be protected by the British monarchy, by the British, and the British would say, well, it's not our affair. We don't interfere with these things. Yeah, well, we had an office in Britain and we got kicked out. They didn't let us stay. So anyhow, so that's one thing. Then there's an infrastructure. You do not see the infrastructure. The infrastructure is much bigger than the actual combatants. It could be in the 10-to-1 or greater range. And that is the infrastructure of recruitment. Now, how is this infrastructure recruitment works? Well, I saw this firsthand in 1968 to early 70s. There were these anti-war demonstrations, right? And then you had profilers and provocateurs among the demonstrators who would agitate, and they would profile various people, and then they would begin to through social psychologists and to various they would figure out who's right, and they would filter them into another operation that is more radical, is more violent, and then they filter those to another operation. That's how the Weathermen was created. The Weathermen did not create themselves. There was a structure that was funneling people into the Weathermen. Whether the individual Weathermen even knew that they were being funneled in there or not, they don't even know. I myself was being funneled into something, and I did get funneled into something. And then I got into brainwashing sessions. Now, what are these brainwashing sessions like? They're group sessions. They're like Mao's self-criticism sessions. And what you do is you're in this group, and it's controlled by the controllers in the group, but it appears to be somewhat leaderless. And the idea is they keep posing this question of why. The way it works is, why are you not? Why is the population not responding? Why is this? Why is that? Why is this? Because you haven't been able to reach the emotional, there hasn't been, and they keep, and after a while, you develop this emotional condition where you're ready to become a terrorist. Okay, and I went through that. So I have firsthand experience of how that works. Now, then you have the media involvement in terms of broadcasting and support operations. And then you have the so-called the legal profession, the human rights people, the various types of organizations that are there, humanitarian organizations that are very they'll attack one group, or they'll support another group, or they will and so you have this above suspicion element of sort of soft support, the mushy support. Oh, get together, have a dialogue, that sort of thing. So that whole apparatus is part of this whole structure. Now, I would say the actual military combatants is a very small percentage of the whole structure that's behind the scenes, that's supporting it, funneling people in, financing it. Here you get to the financing part. Where's all this money coming from to finance the support structure and the combatants? Where is it coming from? Who's putting it up? And so forth. Okay, so this becomes the whole issue. So if ISIS has 20,000 people in the field, that's huge. You only need a couple hundred terrorists to cause all hell break loose everywhere. If you have 20,000 people, then you're on the verge of actually being more than just a terrorist organization. You're on the verge of if you have that many people, that means you have a support apparatus in the hundreds of thousands of people involved around the world. Bankers, philanthropists, religious institutions. In the case of ISIS, it's just massive, and only governments could have that kind of governments, like the Saudi government or the Qatari government or the U.S. government, or elements outside the in the covert side of the U.S. Government could have these kind of things, or could be connected to these kind of things. And so this is what you're up against. It's when they say the refugees are going to be a cover for terrorism, baloney. Governments are the cover for terrorism. It's not the refugee. Oh, all the terrorists are gonna come in through the refugees. Believe they don't need that. Put the terrorists in with the refugees. It's already there. Besides, if you put them in the refugees, they might get caught. because they do check these refugees. It's not exactly, So now the question is, how do you defeat this? Okay, the basic formula in defeating an irregular war, whether it's terrorism or an insurgency or whatever, is the allocation of resources is in the following rough proportion: 10% military, 30% political propaganda, 30% cultural activity, 30% economic activity. You want to stop an insurgency in a third world country, you build roads. You provide economic services, right? That's the economic. You do the cultural thing. You do the political thing. But you do not over deploy militarily. You keep your military deployment at the smallest possible level in terms of deploying against an insurgency or an international. You use human intelligence. You use penetration, intelligence operatives that penetrate these organizations. You don't randomly go out and kill anybody. You don't use drones on anybody. I don't care how bad they are. That is the most inefficient way to defeat a terrorist organization, is to send a drone out. That's the most insane thing. Because what you have to do to defeat a terrorist organization or an insurgency is you have to win the hearts and minds of the population. You're not going to win the hearts and minds of the population by sending drones out and then they'll get 1 out of 10, one bad guy out of 10, and then all of a sudden you have 20 more bad guys. Now you have to expand. So so whoever sold the United States on this drone program, it wasn't about killing terrorists. It was about terrorizing the population of the planet. Okay, so now the second thing, you must expose the forces behind the terrorist group. If there are such things, you cannot even begin to stop anything like that unless you go public with who is running it, where it's coming from, where the money is coming from, and so forth and so on. Because you cannot deal with that. You have to go to the place, to the country that has the safe house, and you got to threaten that country. If they don't stop this, you're going to take retaliation against them. Either it's boycotts, whatever. You do not deal with the terrorist effect by dealing with the terrorists themselves. You deal with the forces behind that have this huge infrastructure that maintains them. And lastly, in winning the hearts and minds of the population, you have to go among the population and say, these people are being financed by these people. They're being run by these people. This is who controls them. We're with you. They're not with you. They're with them. Okay, and then what you do is you provide whatever economic. You arm the people. And in some cases, you arm these people. So yeah, they're coming in to kill you. Okay, we'll arm you. We'll back you up. We'll support you. You know. So then the people say, okay, the government is supporting us. They're providing economic activity. They care about us. They don't want to kill us. They want to stop the killers. And that's when you start to do that, then essentially you start to isolate the terrorist organization or the insurgency or whatever. That's the key. All right, on a large scale or on a small scale, you never ever defeat irregular warfare through direct military means. You only defeat them through political, economic, and cultural means with some military activity. Okay. So now, those people who are the victims of modern irregular warfare, of terrorism in this case, they have to see that there is going to be a fight against it. You have to recruit them. You have to get them involved in the fight. You cannot treat them as if they don't exist. And this is very key. Because then once they are fighting it, and once they know who it is they're fighting, not some military person, but who the agency is that is behind it, then you have capacity to prevent the collapse of morale in the population that the terrorist incident, the terrorist activity is designed to cause. So this is pretty much spelled out in different ways in the book. The book's much more complicated and much more oriented, but that kind of gives you a sense of it. Now, how did Putin defeat the Chechen insurrection, the Chechen Islamic insurrection inside Chechnya, which the previous government could not defeat? He told his soldiers, do not kill anyone, any civilian. These are our people. You only go for the terrorists. Number two, you go to the people and you make it very clear you're there to help them. And out of that process, and it was a complicated process, a Chechen military capability developed within the Chechens themselves that were backed by Putin. He gave them support. So he created, or he helped to create, from the existing organic structure of society, a governing force that could act with the support of the Russian forces to recruit and create the forces that would essentially deny the Chechens the space to operate in. Because the last thing a terrorist group wants to do is operate in a completely hostile environment or an insurgency. To operate in a completely hostile environment. If the environment is neutral, that is, they don't care which way, they just don't want to be hurt. They don't want to be. They don't want the government to come in and start shooting everybody up, and they don't want the terrorists to come in. That's a different situation. So Putin organized a resistance in Chechnya of Chechens, for Chechens. Okay, and that's the model. And then you support that. You do not go in and occupy and have Russian troops everywhere, on every corner, in every place, because that won't work. Because the people themselves will see the Russian troops as occupiers. That is why you cannot have Russian troops. That is why it would be very unwise for Putin to deploy Russian troops into Syria directly to be part of the combat. If he does it, it's got to be it's a very touchy situation, because at what point do the Syrians begin to see the Russians as invaders rather than supporting the institutions that are legitimate institutions that want to free Syria from the Daesh, etc. So that's just a brief summation of this whole question. None of this stuff is what it is. None of this stuff is what they tell you it is. None of this stuff is what is told in the media. It is never. None of this stuff is what it is, what they tell you. Okay, it is what it is. It's a form of warfare. In most cases, it's a form of proxy warfare, or it's a form of demoralizing the population to bring in police state structures to impose conditions which otherwise the population would not accept.
On that note, can you say very briefly where LPAC gets its regarding the Chechens and Syria, that the soldiers did not enter there?
Well, no, I'm not. I'm saying that it's unwise but that is how Putin did it in Chechnya. He did not deploy Russian troops to do the entire fighting. He recruited the Chechens to set up their own institutions.
Yeah, I had somebody throw in my face that Putin committed genocide in Chechnya.
Well,
recently.
yeah. Well, I'm sure there are people that will say that.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm being more technical. Okay, I'm not trying to get into who's right and wrong here. I'm trying to create a technical concept that none of this is this is all a product of continuing warfare in the nuclear age. Okay, that's what all this stuff is all about. And
Can I just add though? The head of the Chechen army is like strongly supporting Putin now.
Okay.
Like they're actually willing. They've already said that they would go in.
Yeah, he's the second most demonized person in Russia after Putin.
Like they want to help with ISIS.
Kadyrov.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's Muslim, and most of their army, they're ready to go to help in whatever way they can.
Okay.
Well, they
So-
swore allegiance to Russia.
Yeah. So now I want to do something very different now. I want to go into the current situation. To understand the current situation, I want to present a historical parallel to today that is prior to the World War II, post-World War II nuclear age. And that is the period from roughly 1848 to 19, 40, the advent of World War II. Okay, and okay, now I'm saying this to contrast the okay. I'm saying this is in contrast to the current situation. During this period, there was created a capability to bomb, terrorize, and assassinate people. That capability was developed by the British. This capability was developed by the British and was very effective and to a large degree successful. It began in the 1840s with something called the Young a cultural movement called Young Britain, Young France, Young Germany, Young America, Young Italy, etc. And these were cultural movements, a kind of a romantic cultural movement that idolized, and these romantic cultural movements led to the promotion of various forms of socialism, communism, Marxism, Mazziniism, whatever. And it culminated in the 1848 uprising against the Austro-Hungarian, against the all across Europe. And these were all young people who were indoctrinated in various forms, and this was so-called to go against the repressive governments of that period, repressive governments that were put in place after Napoleon. So this is like about 30 years after the Napoleonic Wars. And then what happened is, out of these movements, some of them socialists, some of them were whatever, they distilled a core grouping of anarchists under Mazzini, who was who became the leader of the propaganda duo, as a big Freemasonic leader. He worked with Karl Marx for a while. Proudhon, and who was the other guy? The one that everyone likes today. Bakunin. These were some of the theoreticians. And basically, the whole thing is, you see this in a microscope with some of the anarchists today. The idea is, by violent acts of terror, you essentially awaken the population, and you express your, hatred for repression, for the government, for whatever, and so they had these anarchist cells. Right now, obviously, most of the population were not that interested in them, but they had their literature and they had their support apparatus and everything. Now, there were 4 major assassinations done by anarchists. Very crucial people. The first was Alexander II of Russia in 1881. That had a huge impact on Russia and Russia's foreign policy and otherwise. The second one was the president of France, Sadi Carnot, in 1894. This president of France was a nationalist, and he was engaged in a fight against the British Empire in Africa. And he was open to maintaining very close relations with Germany. And it got changed. That whole situation got changed after his assassination in 1894, after the removal of Bismarck. The third assassination, which was very, very significant, incredibly significant, was the President of the United States, William McKinley. That brought in a British operative by the name of Teddy Roosevelt. U.S. policy completely changed. From being an opponent to the British Empire and supporting the world's development, it went, the U.S. then merged with the British Empire. 3 major assassinations: the Tsar of Russia, the President of France, and the President of the United States. And then there was a final one that kind of kicked things off. It was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914. That kind of kicked off the powder keg there for World War I. So where did these anarchists ever go after British operatives? No, they never touched them. So why? So this was how they did things. This was the empire deploying irregular warfare in this form, in the form of anarchists, to assassinate leaders. And these are not the only assassinations. There are many other assassinations of key people in this period by the British. And there's one story about the assassin of McKinley. This guy came over from Europe, slept with a woman by the name of Emma Goldman, who was very celebrated in New York City as one of the. She had the Henry Street Settlement House, which was a kind of do-gooder thing for the poor. And she gave a speech about, calling for the assassination of McKinley. And things got really bad for her afterwards, and she had to leave to go to Great Britain. And she was presented as a cause célèbre to the British. But if you go and look her up now, she's a great heroine among the socialists today. Among the she's portrayed as this great heroine today. And but that's what you were dealing with.
Well, she was also the inspiration for Emma Goldman.
Yeah, Emma Goldman. Anyhow.
Sorry.
Okay, this was at the time of McKinley's assassination. So now we get to the modern situation.
Well, is it okay to ask a question? How come you skipped Lincoln assassination?
Oh, that was different. That wasn't an anarchist, right? Okay, so that hadn't got to that stage yet. Okay, now, so today we have something much bigger, much more intensive, much more extensive, with massive logistics on one end. Okay, so we have this Islamic, Salafist, so-called Islamic. It's not really Islamic, but you have this Islamic Wahhabi type operation being run. But it doesn't exist by itself. You have something else occurring with it. You have the American neocons and their terror operations. And then you have the Zionist Israelis and the Zionists with their terror operations. And now you have these other guys with their terror operations. So you have essentially 3 out of 4 of the most psychotic elements on the planet running terror operations of various different kinds. And they feed one another. And they feed one another. Such that you have psychosis feeding further psychosis, feeding further psychosis. And further bloodshed and further recruitment. And now we've reached the point where this kind of irregular warfare is taking over, is in the process of taking over large chunks of the world. So I'll start with the Zionists. I start with the Zionists because the hardcore Jabotinskyite Zionist is a terrorist. The softer Israeli population, you know, that's different. The Jewish population in New York, that's a little bit different. But the hardcore are terrorists. They're no different in outlook, in psychosis, than ISIS or anything else like that. They are, and I'm telling you this, okay? Now, they have been running operations against the Arab population increasingly, especially since they came into greater influence in Israel after 1978, when Menachem Begin became the prime minister. That's when they really expanded their terror operations.
They were there from the beginning.
Yeah, they're from the beginning, but they did not have state power to the degree that they had after 78.
We established the state.
Yeah. So anyhow, now their terror is justified by the Holocaust. And they use terror against the Arabs and the Palestinians as a means of terrorizing them and controlling them. And these people in the Middle East are the vast majority of people. And this has created the environment, one of the environments for Salafist developments. And the Israeli state went so far as to sponsor some of these Salafist operations themselves to weaken the secular elements like Arafat and others. And this very brutal ideology is that the Arabs are dogs. We kill them and keep them down, and if we don't kill them and keep them down, they're going to kill us. That's the mindset. It's extremely psychotic. Okay, these people who are of this perspective do not have a concept of humanity. It's my group, period, against the world. And so that's one thing that's going on, which is very, very bad, very, very, very bad. Now we go into the neocons, the Project for a New American Century. It's a similar thing. The United States must, through military means, remain the dominant power on the planet. And no part of the world will be allowed to develop economically the power to challenge, to overcome this thing. Now, let me tell you something. This is an outgrowth of an imperial perspective in the United States that has been sponsored and promoted by the British, that goes back to the Confederacy. But it is mindless in a certain sort of way. It doesn't understand that if you want to remain a power, you must develop economically. It doesn't understand that. It only understands that the projection of US military power around the world, going into every country and frightening the country into going along with Wall Street and the City of London, is the only way. So they represent Wall Street and the City of London, so do the Zionists, but they represent a much bigger operation. And their whole approach is, you know, we have the nukes, we have the drones, we have special forces, we have covert operations. You do not mess with the United States. You do not go against who is the United States? Well, it's not the American people. It's Wall Street and the City of London. It's our system. And every country is scared of it. They go into a country like Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia. I'm trying to think of what other ones. Those are the drone cases, the most common drone cases. And they don't even have a war going on in those countries. And those countries can't stop them from using drones. Now, and then the neocons are supported by the religious fundamentalists in the United States. Now, it is not a paradox that the religious fundamentalists in the United States are psychotic and anti-Semitic, but they believe Israel has been chosen by God, and everything starts with Israel. Are you for or against Israel? But it's totally psychotic. And that is the political support for the neocons, to a large degree, comes from the psychotic religious element, who believe the Jews killed Christ. Yet they can't put the two together. You know, it's kind of a strange sort of psychosis. So you have another form of insanity backing up a strategic form of insanity in the US. And it is causing problems in the world. And it's also creating massive recruitment to what? To the Salafists, to the Islamic terror. Now, so now we come to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey. What is Turkey? Turkey is prime minister and president are closet members of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's one form. And then you have Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So what did the Saudis do? What did their US do? What did their networks in Pakistan, ISI, do? They would not allow Afghanistan to come together as a nation. They kept funding and financing wars in Afghanistan after the Soviets left. And then they created the Taliban in the refugee camps, and the Taliban took over most of Afghanistan, and then they ran an operation against the Taliban. But in the whole process, you had all these people getting training and sent all over the world back to their countries to cause more training. And this was being done by the, why? Because this is the force that's going to be used against China, to be used against India, to be used against Russia, to be used against Europe, to be used against the world. What do the Saudis think they're doing? The Saudis are crazy and stupid. They think they're ultimately going to have a world caliphate. They're crazy. They're nuts. They're absolutely nuts.
No, they are not.
They have to be a part. They're not nuts?
No.
They have to be a
The
part.
Saudis,
Go ahead.
I really don't like to think about the Saudis as something by themselves.
Okay.
The Saudis are a tool in the hands of
That's what I'm going to get to. Okay, that's what I'm getting to. I'm saying, so now the British are playing all these things off against each other. That's what I'm getting at. And what's their plan? What's their perspective? Their perspective isn't to have order or peace in the world. Their perspective is to drown the entire world in this. That's their perspective. Bring about a destruction of civilization. That's their perspective. Barbarism breeds barbarism, breeds barbarism, breeds barbarism, breeds barbarism. That's the British perspective. Use one to create the other, use the other to create the other, and just keep it going until human civilization is thrown back into the Middle Ages. That is the oligarchical worldview. That is what you're dealing with. Do the Saudis know that? I have no idea what the Saudis know or don't know. Do the neocons know this? I doubt it. They're stupid. Do the Zionists know this? I think they're stupid. I don't think they know it. And you know what the problem is? None of them have an emotional connection to humanity. Okay? They are driven by purgative violence, the feeling of power and a liberation from oppression through purgative violence. This is what you're dealing with. This is what you're dealing with. Okay, now let's look at Putin. Now, how do you deal with something like this? Here you are, you're Vladimir Putin. You just pulled your country out of a total mess, and you want your country to survive. You know, you want your country to survive. You want humanity to survive too. You do not want to be drowned in the dark age, collapse of civilization. So how are you going to deal with this? Okay. Now, so we have the refugee crisis, right? And now the refugee crisis is being used to create the counter crisis to the refugee crisis, which is a revival of racism on a mass scale in Europe, latent racism in the United States, Canada, and in Europe, right? So,
What about Mexico? Not really.
so in other words, modern irregular warfare today is civilizational, and it is now directed at the global populations as a whole. Now, let's look at Putin's behavior in all of this. Okay. The question I ask you is Putin following the textbook? Let's look and see if Putin is actually following the textbook that I mentioned. First of all, he's made a threat publicly to reveal all the nations and the networks involved in supporting and funding this. He made this at the G20 meeting. He also said we're going to find everybody involved, you know, and we're going to hunt them down, and we're going to kill them. But we're not going to go, you know, use drones. Right? Now, so that's one thing. So he's threatening to reveal the whole game, place by place. He's warning the United States, he's warning the Saudis, he's warning everybody, look, I know who all of you are. I know where all your money is coming from. I know what it is. I'm preparing to go after you publicly. That's a warning. Number two, he is working with the Chinese to bring in the land bridge, the economic development, right? 30% economic, right? This is what Putin is doing. So you're offering the people in the region, and what does he say in his Valda address? The people in the region should have a say in what's going to happen. They should have a say in their future. That's what he said in Valda. So what's he doing? He's recruiting the people of the region to support a perspective for economic development, turning them against the forces that are doing this. Okay. In other words, he's not gonna send Russian troops in and win this war. Forget it. Russia doesn't have that much military. But what they do have, they are using it to assist the local forces. Okay. And he's not attacking the civilian population as an excuse to go after the terrorists. You know, rather, he is recruiting the civilian populations of the region. And I'm telling you, the population of Lebanon, Iran, Syria, probably Egypt too, they're saying, okay, Putin is a good guy because he wants to help us, not rule us. This is very important. At least that's the perspective. And that is the perspective. That is the perspective you have to have. Now, So in my view, overall, Putin is following the strategy of how you defeat this thing. You recruit the victims. You recruit the nations which are being destroyed by it. You recruit the populations that are under attack. You threaten to expose, and probably soon will expose, the forces behind it. And they will now become the enemy image for the victims, for the people being destroyed. That is how you go after. Now you have China behind you, and you probably have India behind you. But only, and so essentially you're pulling together a new world system that is based upon a positive notion of what mankind is, or at least some positive notion of what mankind is.
When he does this, will he succeed in revealing them within the respective countries? For instance, will the American people know who's responsible?
We'll get to that part, okay? You're ahead of me, okay. Now, yesterday, in the United States, two developments have occurred in the Congress. None of these are in themselves a big deal yet. They point to a shift. One of them is Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, and another congressman have introduced a bill to force the U.S. to abandon its illegal war against Syria. It's the first congresswoman to step forward. They could only do this in the context of what Putin has been doing. Rand Paul and Ron Wyden in the Senate have just introduced yesterday a bill to cut off all, to confiscate the assets of any nation or entity which is involved in supporting these terrorists. That means everybody. But it's going into Congress as a bill, okay, in the Senate, okay. Now,
Who's going to boycott the United States?
yeah, right. So anyhow, so now we, the LaRouche movement, are now moving to break the 28 pages open. Back in January 7th, former Senator Graham laid out the following formulation. And we know the Saudis were involved. And the Saudis know we were involved. And we did nothing about it, but actually protected them. What does that tell the Saudis? What does it tell the rest of the world about us? It means the green light is on. And then what he says is that you wouldn't have had all these other things occur if the 28 pages had been revealed and made public. And then, you know, you would have had further developments off of that. Now, at this point, I don't even know if reading the 28 pages on the congressional floor, and this is me speaking, not the movement, is going to make any difference to the U.S. population at this point. I don't know, okay? But it does open the door for those who want to fight this thing, who otherwise are scared. Okay, so we're now we have a former senator working with us, Mike Gravel from Alaska. He was just on the Alex Jones show. And what he's going to the congressman, he's saying, look, there was a case surrounding my reading of the Pentagon Papers in Congress. The U.S. Congress has the right to reveal classified information to inform its citizens. And that was held up by the Supreme Court. Therefore, he is saying to any congressman, you get up there and either read, if you have the actual copy, read it. If you don't, say what you know is in it, or go as close as you can to it and put it on the congressional record.
This is the question. These people, these congressmen who have been talking about these 28 pages for a year now, why none of them read it?
They have read it. But they haven't done anything about it.
They haven't done anything.
No, I don't want to use the expletive, okay? But I won't use the expletive. It starts with a P and it has a U in it, okay? That's the problem. So I heard that Mike Gravel had this call with Walter Jones, right? And so Walter Jones is telling him that Rand Paul is going to go speak to the president of the United States and get him to release the 28 page and something like that. And I heard Michael say, what's it? Come on now. You don't do that. Come on. You gotta stick your neck out. So anyhow, so this is what we're doing. And believe me, we're a movement. They're not a movement. But we are getting traction now on this. So now here's what I'm going to tell you guys. Okay. Because of what Putin has done, and because of what we could do, when you hit the Salafist thing, when you hit Saudi Arabia on this, you go after the control of this territory. You also hit the Zionists. You also hit the neocons. You hit them all because they're all mutually reinforcing. You're not going to take down one and then leave the others. You're going to take them all down. And that's the whole point. And so I know that the Zionist thing is wearing very thin among the Jews of New York City. I know the neocon thing is wearing very thin on the more cognizant population of the United States. And I know this Salafist thing, this ISIS thing is wearing very thin. Now we have the case of France. France has put itself into a police state. Well, I got to tell you something. They didn't have to go into a police state. They've always been a police state. France has always been a police state. So if they announce that they're a police state, there's nothing new, okay? Laughing. Okay.
Can you qualify that a little bit?
Huh?
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Napoleon.
It's a Napoleonic state, okay? It's the state of Napoleon. It hasn't changed historically.
Like most of the third world country, oh well, I don't want to use
the
term third world, but anyway, like Middle East country or some of the African country, well, it's always been totalitarian. You can't say, oh, we're not an emergency.
Now, France has always been a police state, okay? Except maybe under de Gaulle.
Is it in principle? Is it in law? Or
It's in law. It's in effect. It's in effect in the way it works. Yeah.
Okay. And psychologically, the French.
Yeah, the French go along. Yeah, it works. Now, however, are you leaving?
Yeah.
I'll see you tomorrow. Right. Yeah. All right. So French are now working military operations, air operations in collusion with the Russians. So people are saying, wow, the French are working with the Russians. Oh my God. I'm going, I don't know. I don't know what that means. But it is the case that the French, the Germans, whoever, they want to stop this thing, they got to work with the Russians. They want their countries destroyed, don't work with the Russians. Okay, so this is the balance. Now, Obama has absolutely no intention of working with the Russians. Hillary Clinton wants to set up, she's announced that she wants no-fly zones to go into confrontation with the Russians in her campaign. Okay, so this is going to get very hairy.
Fly zone for
Yeah, so this is going to get very hairy, okay? There is an escalation going on in the United States. There's forces now calling for the United States to work with Russia. And then there's McCain, there's the crazies, there's Hillary Clinton, there's Obama, who are determined on behalf of Wall Street to not allow that to happen. Because once you stop this thing, you have no other, you have only one last option to stop the world from developing. And that's the fourth psychosis, which is coming up in Paris on December 11th, or next week, but it goes through to December 11th. And that's the carbon thing. And that is another psychotic movement, which is similar in the negative attitude towards the human species in general. The Zionists are very negative. The Christian fundies are very negative. The Salafists are very negative. The neocons are like, either your top dog or your bottom dog, very negative. Okay. And now you have the environmentalists who say man is evil because it's despoiling Mother Nature. So you got this negativity about humanity. So that is why we're beginning in New York City, the most cognitively advanced part of the United States. A movement that will resonate a classical culture. And we're doing that with music, and we're doing that with our ideas. And we're going to radiate from New York City to the world and to the United States. And that's one aspect of our operation. Because the concept of man that is currently in play in these psychotic elements, there has to be a point of reference for those people who are not psychotic, other than just to try to stop the psychosis from taking over the world. There has to be a positive orientation. And that is what we're in the middle of doing. Now, so I think we have an opportunity because, and this is my point of view, what Putin did in Syria, and this is not coming from the organization, it's coming from me. What Putin did in Syria has caused the terrorist apparatus to be unleashed before, while it still has a preponderance of force, before it's diminished. Use it before you lose it, basically.
You're saying this is the last, what they call?
Yeah, this is the French, all this stuff. You're going to see a lot of it now coming, to drown the, I don't know if it's going to happen, to drown the world in this stuff and create as much, hysteria about borders and police state and all of that. Try to run that operation now. But it also forces the issue, right? For those who do not want to be governed by this kind of situation. And this is our opportunity. And we're going to take it. Whether Helga's in Germany, Jacques Cheminade is in France, Xi Jinping is in Russia, I mean, is in China, Putin is in Russia, and so forth. We're going to take this opportunity to demonstrate the humanity on one end, but the military force on another, and expose the power behind it. And that's now coming. I think that is now coming. And that's fully out there, and it is already out there in a lot of places. But you can't just expose the power behind it, because people will be terrified of it. That alone won't stop it. There has to be somebody fighting openly. And you're seeing that now with a few congressmen. You're seeing that with LaRouche in the streets. You're seeing it on an international level with the BRICS and with Putin. So you see an open fight now. And potentially, as the powers behind this are exposed, they will be isolated. They will begin to lose political power. And part of that is Wall Street. Part of that is the takedown of Wall Street. Part of that is the takedown of the financial system, which is behind all of this, which cannot survive without this at this point. So that's where we are. And I'm going to stop there and open it up.
Yeah, how are you guys gonna? You say you're gonna take on. When you're gonna radiate from New York for your, to wake up the Americans. I was gonna say earlier, did you say musically, or how are you gonna go about it? Because you have the cultural aspect.
Mass media control.
Yeah.
It's a hard question. Okay. This gets into the question of the deep issue of people who do not resonate with humanity, do not resonate with the future, do not resonate with a sense of themselves being placed in that sense. And the proper performance of classical music, in particularly in the form of choruses, is a way of placing yourself, is a way of placing people in that sense. It's also a way of placing yourself personally in that universal sense. Now, a lot of you here, actually all of you here, have a sense of that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But you have to have a culture that promotes that. And you have to have, and what's going on, now I'll give you an example of what's going on. This may seem esoteric, but it's not. The modern period got rid of the tuning that classical music was on. They changed the tuning and thereby shifted everything. And what we have now in New York is a lot of churches are now starting to tune their pianos down to the appropriate tuning, so their choruses can sing. And there's a huge revival now beginning in New York City, which we're involved in, of reviving classical musical compositions in the church service, because it's been gospel. These are primarily African American churches, but not just African American churches. But it's either gospel or rock or whatever, and a lot of these churches are saying, no, this is what we need. We need to deal with our problems by bringing people up to a higher level, to a higher sense of culture. And so this is part of what we're doing. And then in New York, you have a lot of classical musicians. You have a lot of people in that realm, and they're being organized into a movement. So that's an example. And what does this do? This allows people to have a sense of themselves, which is not fragmented like, I'm from this part of the country, I'm from that part of the country, these are my issues. You go to any politician and you talk about anything and they say, well, that's not my department. I'm a state person, I'm a local person. I don't deal with that. I'm only concerned about Washington State. I'm only concerned about California. Everywhere you go, it's like that. Nobody is saying, I am responsible for the nation. Now, Mike Gravel says he's responsible to the human species as a whole, and then the nation, and then his state. That is what has to occur. People have to start thinking that way, and they're not going to think that way unless there's something that is an exemplar that they can see as a model. If the model doesn't exist, even if it's a small number of people involved, there is nothing there's no point of reference. We're a small movement, but we're a point of reference for a lot of things that are going on in the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
That doesn't really answer the question. Sorry. Okay.
Before Putin went into Syria, LaRouche said publicly, Putin, you should go now. And then he went. I just want to know your thoughts on that.
I don't have concrete knowledge on those matters. But I will say that LaRouche is still in the institutions. He was brought in to run an operation around with the Reagan presidency. In other words, there was a group of people who were going to come in with Ronald Reagan to change U.S. policy in a very dramatic way. And these were people that represented the leftovers from Kennedy and from FDR. LaRouche was much younger then. This was 40 years ago, 38 years ago. And these people were significantly older than LaRouche. And he was brought in to organize internationally as well as nationally for a shift in policy in the United States coming into the Reagan administration. Ronald Reagan did not have Ronald Reagan came in and he was shot. And he was out of action for a long time. And during that period, the consolidation of the presidency under Ronald Reagan did not take place. And as a result, the whole team that LaRouche represented got derailed. But the point is that network still exists, even though these people are much older. And there's some that are his age and some are a little younger. That network still exists and is still active. And I'm sure that network intersects other international networks on this subject, but I don't know in what way or how. I don't know the details. But it is the case that LaRouche had a sense that Putin was going to move. And I think it was in large part LaRouche's reading of the situation that Putin had no choice but to move. Because if he had not moved at the time that he moved, then Syria would have gone down. And with Syria, the whole situation would have shifted. You would have had this thing take over that area, and then you would have had all hell break loose. It's still all hell is breaking loose, but okay.
Is LaRouche like coming from, how do you call it? Is just a regular citizen of the United States? I know he's serving Burma.
Right.
But social, I mean, in family roots, he's connected to the higher institutions.
No.
People who are
Not through family, no.
So it's a regular soldier that serves, because military people usually they think differently. It doesn't matter how. They always have a way of making, making decisions.
Okay.
So they,
I don't know the details, but he's always operated on his own, but he's always operated on on his own in context of and in discussion with.
So his survival could just be based on his own wits, or there are
Okay.
people watching out for him?
Yes, people are watching out for him because he's not just doing it on his own. He's doing it in conjunction with the discussion that is going on about what he's going to do. So I'll give you an example. He went into the Indian situation in Calcutta. And I think his operation there as a young, by the way, he was not a soldier, he was a medic, paramedic. He was a paramedic. He was not involved in the shooting, but he was dealing with people who were dying the whole time. So, and wounded. So he went into India and got involved in the Indian independence movement. But what he was doing as an American was undermining the British operation. And at the point that the British were going to kill him, he was warned by American intelligence to get out. To what degree he was cooperating with American intelligence in an anti-British operation or not, I don't know. Mind you, American intelligence was, in that period, was supporting Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam at the same time. So it wasn't like they were anti-communist or anything like that. It was only after FDR died that it changed, that changed. Okay, so that's an example. So at every point along the way, he has initiated projects of his own making, but he has kept certain people informed of what he was doing.
So he has an intelligent background, like you were saying, like an agent?
No, I don't think so. But he doesn't need to have an intelligent background.
No, I mean, like, if he was, like, I know you say he's a paramedic, but to work to undermine the empire means that you'll also be a part of it, you know.
Indirectly, yes. But only because he's brilliant. They saw him as a very brilliant young person. You know, and so he was very active. And he was very active politically in the United States when he went back. And at each step along the way, he was active in the economy, he was active in reorganizing companies, he was active in many different areas. And I have a biography to give you at some point for you to read. But he's always been in touch with certain layers. But it was only in the late 70s that he was brought in to play a major role. And that was because he had a political movement. Because he was just an individual, it wouldn't matter. But he had a political movement, and that political movement was was a vehicle for disseminating the intelligence and the ideas. So that political movement was key. Without that political movement, there would be no point in bringing him in, because the purpose of bringing him in was to connect their isolation with the political movement, the isolation of this layer in the U.S. establishment, policy establishment, with a political movement. But the political movement was independent. It was never under the control of anyone other than LaRouche. Well, it went different ways during his imprisonment, but it's been quite a ride, I should say, because we did things that people get shot for, and we got away with it. Although he did go to jail, and there were attempts to kill him.
Jacques Cheminad's press release or statement that came very quickly after the Paris attacks there. I was absolutely shocked that he said that the pipeline should be bombed. You go after the banks that launder the money.
Right.
And he started naming who was implicit in the funding of this terrorists, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the Emirates. And so I guess my question comes down to, was Cheminad thinking on his own when he said, let's bomb the pipeline?
No, that's what you do.
Which pipeline are we talking
All
about?
the pipelines that control.
And they did. I think they did. I think the Russians did bomb them, and the tankers. I think they did.
It's for the oil?
Yeah, the oil being sold on the black market.
Generated.
There's a pipeline now that comes into Turkey, I think through Syria.
Yeah, I thought it was a project that to be built, but
No,
It's already
there's an
existing?
existing one now, I think. And I think this is the,
and that's one of the main reasons why they want the Syrian government out, because to allow the path to go through. And Syrian don't want to do that. If the Syrian did that, then it will undermine the Russia, the gas pipeline go to Europe.
yeah, there's Paul was, there's a girl actually on YouTube called Syrian Girl.
I think I watched
Have you-
YouTube,
have you
that's-
seen her?
Yeah.
And she's quite knowledgeable, and she was
Maybe Hassan will
I've only, yeah.
you have any more knowledge on the pipeline coming to Syria?
People forgot how the Syrian situation developed.
Hmm.
The Syrian situation developed because Bashar al-Assad and his government refused to build the pipeline that goes from Qatar all the way to Europe, so that Europe will stop depending on Russian gas. This is the whole starting point of the Russian situation.
Yeah.
And the insistence of removing Assad is basically they are hoping to bring a government that will allow the pipeline to be separated.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's that's.
This is the situation.
That's the situation. Yeah. Well, what's your point? I mean, what's your view?
My view on it is that there are things of that nature going on. There is this thing about, isolating Russia, bypassing Russia's oil production for Europe. And there is this whole aspect of finding a way to supply Europe with gas and oil such that Russia can be cut off from Europe. There is that whole aspect of the situation. The whole development of the Canadian and American, the North Dakota, Alberta, all of that is part of this geopolitical thing of being able to bypass Russia and to some degree the Middle East with extra oil.
That's what I'm saying.
Huh?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I'm getting to this. I'm gonna get you on this, okay? okay. And the idea is the reason they want to do that is what's more important. Is they want to destroy Russia in the Middle East, but they want to have enough oil to sustain, at least in their minds, want to have enough oil to sustain what remains, right? So the intention of doing that is an attack on humanity. It's not simply a money thing or an oil thing or what have you. It's a geopolitical thing. Now, let's go into the insanity of that. It is totally insane. Why? Because you're gearing up oil production in areas where it's much more expensive, and nobody wants to lose the oil market. The economy is collapsing. So what happens? You have a huge $1 trillion or more oil bubble ready to burst, and this is geopolitical warfare, using oil as geopolitical warfare. And So the ISIS thing is tied to that. Because it's not just Russia. Where does China get its oil? From Iran, from the Middle East, from Canada, or from different places like that. So we want to make China dependent on other sources of oil, then we control them. This is psychotic. This is completely psychotic.
That's why Harper wanted to sell the.
But there is a deeper game being played. That's just the surface. The deeper game is the collapse of civilization is the ultimate intention of the people who are pushing geopolitics, pushing the ecology movement, pushing all these terrorist organizations. The deeper game being played, not the game of, oh yeah, we're gonna become energy independent so we can nuke the Middle East. You know, I mean that's totally insane. But you're dealing with multiple levels of insanity here. The only thing that works economically is what the Chinese have now committed to adopting, which was originally our policy, which is the Silk Road and the Eurasian land. That's the only viable economic solution. Producing oil does not create development itself.
Viable solution to who?
To everybody.
To everybody. But the Americans and the Europeans are not looking for solutions viable to everybody.
Well,
looking for solutions viable to certain kind of people.
Right, but the Europeans are now starting to break with that.
Well, I'm still not seeing the signs of that.
Because, and also the U.S. is going to have to break with that if they want to survive.
If the Europeans are actually not breaking away from the United States,
They are.
we would have seen completely different response from France after what happened last week. They are continuing exactly the same thing. Go drop some bombs, and that's it. And 2 weeks from now, this what happened in Paris will be completely forgotten.
Yeah.
But what remains is a change of the constitution. It is a police state.
Yeah.
It's going to become more police state after this thing.
Yeah.
So this, the United States has been a police state before September 11. And then more police state after September 11. So
Right.
this is the whole thing, the whole idea of all of this. The ISIS did not exist at the beginning of the Syrian crisis 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So what I'm saying that the particular situation, I'm not putting it in an international context. I'm talking about the particular situation in Syria. It started with that pipeline. They wanted to build from Qatar, go to Syria, go to the Mediterranean, and then Europe. And that means that Russia will be completely cut off from Europe, and the gas in Russia will have no customers for it.
Yeah, no value.
And when Bashar al-Assad said, no, we're not going to do that, then the Saudis got crazy, the Qataris got crazy, everybody got crazy. You want to build that pipeline. Okay, so that goes along with what you're saying internationally or strategically of the crazy people.
So why did Bashir reject that?
Because Bashar al-Assad wants to stay in power, and the Russians were supporting him. They have the support in Latakia. It is a Russian base. It has been there for.
Yeah, I know his grandfather.
And the Russians are not going to allow the West to take over that. Exactly the same thing like Crimea or Ukraine. There is the Navy, the Russian Navy was in Crimea, and then NATO wants to take over that. So there were actually two goals in Syria. First, to cut off Russia from Syria so that they lose their base, as well as cut Russia off from Europe by building that pipeline. That's why the Qataris are involved in this. Qatar is a tiny little thing.
Yeah, it's not even
They have something like few thousand people. Their population is 3,000 people. And they are spending money in Syria like crazy. The Saudis are doing the same thing. Everybody is trying to go along with the American policy of cutting off Russia from Europe. This is the whole thing that's going on, and that game is going on, and that's why it's not going to.
Right, and so okay, so they're trying to cut Russia off from Europe.
Yeah.
Well, that's the whole point.
Yes.
Okay, we agree.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not
and that's the whole point for World War I and World War II and everything else. Yeah, okay, it's been the whole point, the whole time. Okay, now we understand each other now.
But the point is that the Saudis and the Qataris cannot be going after these people. It's like going after the low level guys,
Yeah.
the people in the street.
Yeah,
You want to go after the big ones? The big ones are in Washington and London and Paris. Those are the big ones. Those are the ones who are running this whole ISIS thing.
Gangsters.
And if Russians want to get rid of ISIS, they need to deal with those big ones, not the Saudis and the Qataris. Those are.
yes, that's the next step. That's the next step. We're going to try to get the Russians to go there. Yeah, I agree. The Russians have to go there. Okay. Yeah, okay. Okay. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, what is the role of the Vatican in all of this and the Vatican Bank? Because geographically, they're right in the middle of all of this. They've had an influence on governing bodies going back a long ways. Where are they at with all of this?
Where is the Vatican?
Don't they have a huge influence?
Where is the Vatican?
Over England
All right.
and the States?
Okay,
No, that's a good question.
the Vatican.
Where is that?
Okay, the Vatican. The Vatican is somewhere caught between the modern age and the medieval period. The best way I can explain it. Okay. Okay. The Vatican is a very complicated situation. Okay. First of all, the Vatican, the Catholic Church is, the word Catholic means universal. It's the universal church. And what does that mean? That means it's universal. Okay. So the way it works is they have a pope and they have councils. Okay, and they have doctrines. And the doctrines change. You had the Middle Age, you had the short Renaissance, you had the anti-Renaissance reaction, and then you have the modern period. Okay. Now, the Vatican is run by a system of celibacy where you have a structure. I'm not saying they're, I don't mean it. I mean a system of not unmarried priests, which makes it a cadre formation. Okay, so it's not like other religions where the priest gets to marry and have children. Therefore, all nuns and priests are the wives of Christ. You have to understand that. That's the organization.
Non-priests are wives
Of Christ, yes.
including priests.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. You're laughing. Okay. Okay, I'm telling you, okay? I'm telling you. Now, this organization has a perpetual structure. It has its heroes, its demons, it has its periods and what have you. Now, it was a faction of the Catholic Church that launched the Renaissance. It was that same faction got killed and wiped out after the Renaissance. Okay. Now, during the Middle Ages and during the reaction, the Vatican was similar. It has similarity in that the Vatican was the religious authority that gave the princes and the kings their right to be kings, what have you. But then you had the Reformation and all of that. So it's in this context that you have to look at the current situation in the Vatican. Okay, now,
Okay, what about the Vatican Bank, for example? I mean, isn't that tied to Wall Street? Isn't that the banking cartel hugely centered at the Vatican to a certain extent?
Okay, so in the recent period, the Vatican has been severely corrupted, okay, by contemporary culture, by modernism. But it had a very nasty element in it, going back to the reaction, you know, the right-wing element in the Catholic Church, okay? And then you have, this thing got corrupted. Now, the problem is this. They have capitulated to the British Empire. That's the problem, not the other way around. They have adopted an alien philosophy, which has never been a Catholic philosophy, in this recent encyclical Laudato Si. A green, environmentalist encyclical. Man is evil because he pollutes Mother Nature. Now this is heresy. Within the context of Catholic traditions, this is the most heretical thing that's probably ever happened to the Catholic Church in its entire history, and it's coming from the Pope. Through the British are, through Schellenhuber and Martin Palmer and all these people, they're pushing this thing through the Vatican. This is huge. It is like one of the world's major religion, the Pope, the leader of that religion, adopts a heresy, an extreme heresy against the body of belief in the church. And people are just like, I don't, you know, and that's how bad the Catholic Church has become. Now, is there going to be a revolt in the Catholic Church? I don't know. I have no idea. There should be, and all the priests should be up in arms. But I don't see them up in arms. I see them mainly saying, well, you know, maybe we'll get past this Pope or not. I don't know, you know. But anyhow, that's what's happened. Now, where was the Vatican under Pope John Paul II, Pope Paul VI? They were for human development. They were against neo-Malthusians. They were not Malthusian. And this John Paul II, LaRouche and Helga got to know John Paul II. He was a very powerful individual. And then he got ill midway through his papacy, and he lost control. And he represented a moral force of an older, more advanced culture. And he lost control over all these factions of the church that went haywire. So they went nuts. You know, from everything from gay activists to environmentalists to charismatic, extreme right wing, to you name it, it all went nuts after he could not control the church. All of the, you know, the Opus Dei got out of control, all these different factions got out of control, and it was ripe for the picking. And it did get picked. And now I don't think the Catholic Church is going to survive, personally.
And the Vatican Bank is just another.
Well, the Vatican Bank is.
I mean, aren't they just situated perfectly in the middle of this entire?
Yeah, but the Vatican Bank is not the. It's not. Is whatever money laundering and corruption is going on in the Vatican Bank. It's just a part of the whole. Yeah, it's just part of the whole thing. But that's not where the Catholic Church is not the bank. The Catholic Church is something else. and how corrupt it is in its finances and its history, You know, there's a lot of corruption in the church, but the point is, they're not going to be around as far as I'm concerned. They're going to go. Unless they make it some radical changes, they're gone. They're not going to be around. You know why? Because the population of the planet is going to develop, and they don't need a Catholic Church. They don't need to get on all fours and crawl before the Pope.
Aren't there like 1 billion subscribers?
Yeah, but they're not gonna, you know, they're not gonna have somebody tell them, you know, yeah, that they gotta work, that they gotta, you know, carbon footprint. I mean, that's not, you know, the Catholic Church is now self-destructing as far as I'm concerned, and that's not the organization saying that, that's me saying.
Paul, in your dissertation on the modern irregular warfare, how does the depopulation policy fit into this scheme?
Well, it's one of the mechanisms for creating the chaos that creates the collapse of civilization, which creates the depopulation.
Are you saying that depopulation is just a fund, or is it a policy?
The policy is depopulation and deindustrialization.
So when you're talking about reducing the world population to $1 billion,
1 to 2 billion, yeah.
That's the terror speech.
This is an instrument. This is an instrument, one of the instruments. The climate change is another one of the instruments. And nuclear war is another possible instrument.
But they all feed into it.
They all feed into this process, yes. And the players, in my view, the players don't know that. They're being used. Ultimately being used. Because they're driven by their madness.
The population question came up, I think, in 2009 at the climate conference in Copenhagen. That's one of the things that Paul included. What do you think? Is it still on the agenda in Paris?
Well, they're already saying that nothing will come out of the conference. Kerry is saying that. Schellenhuber is saying that.
Why is he saying that?
Because I don't think anything's going to come out. Oh, the Chinese are interesting. The way the Chinese respond are interesting. We are listening with rapt attention. Global warming. Oh, global. Climate change. Oh, yes. We are listening with rapt attention. I love the Chinese. We're listening with rapt attention. Yes. Yes. Oh, they agree on climate change. Yes, we agree with rapt attention. we listen with rapt attention. Anyhow, that's funny. So that's the Chinese. The Chinese don't think in that way. They don't think that way. You know, the Chinese, you know, they say, well, you say this, he says that, she says this.
Have to wait for a while.
What do you think? You know, and they're saying that the CO2 causes global warming, but these other people say that it's the sun and the galaxy. You know, and then they weigh it, and then they have that discussion, and then they decide. And I don't think they're going to decide this way. Yeah, but you know, I mean, but their operation is run from the top. The Chinese leadership at the top is making the decisions, you know, on the stuff. And here's my say, if Vladimir Putin is known to be a climate denier, and Xi Jinping, and he shows up at the parade in Beijing, right? You get the idea. They're not going to separate out the people who are running this terrorism, who are also running the climate change thing. They're not going to make it. They're not going to make a distinction between them. Oh, they're good on, they're right on this one and wrong on this one. No, they're not going to do that. So why is this whole climate change being pushed? Why is it being pushed? I think personally, I think they're saying to the Chinese and the Russians that you accept this or we go nuclear. And they're not going to accept it.
Of course they're going to accept it.
So,
It's a distraction.
yeah, it is. No, he's right. It is a profound distraction from the political process involving economic development, it's a huge monkey wrench in everything. In the US,
We keep talking about China has to reduce the carbon emissions. China will not be able to reduce carbon emissions. If they do that, their development is going to stop.
Yeah.
The thing about the green movement, though, is that there's a lot of people attracted to the green movement who don't believe the science, who don't give a shit about hugging trees. There is a lot of, most of the extremists that are attracted to the green movement are extremists. They're anarchists. They actually, you see comments online. These people are actually saying, good, kill them. They're actually, like, they hate themselves, they hate humanity, they hate our system, they hate their lives, they hate the cities, they hate how, you know, congested it is. They are just anarchists in waiting.
Okay.
And they just, it's a psychological effect of being okay with the chaos.
Right.
They just want it to be over.
you hit something very crucial here.
It's psychological.
You're almost saying that the rabid part of the environmentalist movement is the
trigger.
Is the version of ISIS in North America and Europe.
Absolutely. They are hateful people. They really are. They're disgusting human beings. Like I have talked to some of them, and they just like they will actually admit that they're okay with the killing
And defend it.
Yeah, it's really sick.
Yeah.
And
these people, they keep talking about climate change, and we ask them, what is it? What is changing?
Yeah.
We don't have an answer. And if we have an answer, what you are going to do about it, we still don't have an answer. And it's the same, like, remember the discussion about the solar energy, it's the same thing.
Yes.
They just want something to believe in, and they keep
exactly
supporting it irrespective of what's happening.
It's an idea.
So, but I don't know, what is the climate change? Obama, the other day, a couple of days ago, is still talking about rising sea levels. And cities are going to disappear. They have been talking about this for the past 15 years now. I haven't seen any cities disappearing.
Obama bought a huge mansion right on the waterfront. Al Gore owns a huge mansion right on the waterfront. If they're so afraid of, you know, sea level rising.
But Russia and China are going to be in Paris.
So is Prince Charles.
They are going to be in Paris.
I was gonna, you got some. What about the Paris bombing? Has it had anything to do with the French people not wanting refugees to come in? Or, you know, I mean, Germany saying we open the door to the refugees that are coming, they're flooding to Europe. But I didn't know the stand of the French people, France stand on that. So why do the terrorists target France?
I really don't have an answer for you, except that I believe they're going to target everything at this point. And I believe that they're targeting France to help what he was saying, which is increase the police state measures, prepare France for war against Russia. Maybe that's one of them. It's not clear. It's not clear. It's not to me clear why France was being targeted.
Sorry, RT just posted, Anonymous has been doing a lot of work in hacking ISIS sites and stuff. And they have gotten information that there are a lot of attacks planned for tomorrow around the world, including Paris again. They have sent the information to MI5, MI6, the US, like all these intelligence networks. And RT published a report because Anonymous is saying no one's paying attention to this. They're not doing anything about it, so we're gonna do what we can. They have actually published a manual of how to where these sites are that ISIS is operating from, and how to disrupt their communication. Anonymous has actually posted online for anybody to use a manual of how to do what they do, how to hack the ISIS sites, and they're saying that they have planned a whole bunch of stuff for tomorrow.
Yeah, that's scary.
And RT, but here's the thing, and this is very relevant to the movement. When you get this information out ahead of time, when you make it public, you can stop it, right? And this is something that the movement does on a regular basis.
Right. My sense is they're just going to start drowning the world in this stuff because the Russians are now shutting it down. The Russians are now moving ahead to shut it down with local support, with the support of China and so forth. And there's also people in the US that want to shut it down. There's also people in Britain that want to shut it down. So I think they're going to unleash it all at this point.
So just to clarify, earlier you mentioned counter crises in response to the crisis involving the Syrian refugees. So did you mean the terrorist attacks being that sort of counter crisis?
No. I mean that the population's freaking out. They're being told that all the terrorists are coming in with the refugees.
Well, that's exactly
that the population is freaking out. The terrorists are not coming in with the refugees per se. The population.
Because people are going to think because of the terrorists.
Yeah, because they're not being told who's really running it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some terrorists are really getting through.
Probably, but that's not because of the refugees.
The terrorists have been protected the whole time. We're saying protect the refugees now.
Yeah. And oh, by the way, the big issue that we're making is that the climate change issue is whether the refugees will survive the winter, a very cold winter. How many to save them from freezing to death? We're making that the climate change issue.
I like
Yeah.
I like the headline on Rick's has put out. There's man-made climate change in hell, but which countries want to go there?
What about the Farmer's Almanac? It's available now. Ben Franklin special. I just saw one in London Drugs and I bought it. First time I bought one. I've seen one. I've been wanting to buy one for a while, but I asked Paul, we don't even know how Benjamin Franklin, he's the originator of the world, the World Almanac, or just the
Farmer's Almanac. He's one of the originators, yeah, back in the middle 1700s, and he used it as a cultural vehicle because he would put little poems in there. He put little. If you read the original,
it's still much like that. It's still
like he would have things that say, I don't know. He'd have very raunchy sayings, in these very raunchy wouldn't go over in the Victorian era.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he would say. He would have different sayings, different little quips. Yeah.
Anti-British or?
No. He wasn't anti-British at that time. He was just creating a network of people, and he would put in funny things, funny but profound funny.
Oh, okay.
Small question. Do we know much about Mr. Vanker Tate to know?
Yeah, he was in the German military under Hitler.
Oh.
And I don't know if he made it to general. but he became a professor of, I guess, of military studies.
He was writing how to run irregular warfare?
No, he was writing a book on modern irregular warfare, and well, all aspects.
Okay.
So how did the British comes to, and I mean, like is it like written for the Britain, so the empire, supporting the empire, or how to defeat the empire?
He was writing a scientific manual to understand. It could be used negatively, it could be used positively. It wasn't clear, but the point is that if you want to stop this stuff, he's laying out he's revealing the nature of the process so that you understand how to stop it. If you're gonna be, it's not written from the standpoint of how to conduct modern irregular warfare, but you could read it that way. It's written to arm people with how to defeat it.
In other words, it's scientific.
It's scientific.
It covers how it runs, and you can use it.
Well, it takes you from this case to this, and then when does irregular warfare become conventional warfare? When does it doesn't? What's the transition? It goes through everything. But I've just pulled some.
So it will be like the companion route to Wretched Earth. I mean, the Wretched of the Earth.
No, that's the different. The Wretched of the Earth is a proposal to use the oppression that colonial populations have experienced under the colonial system to use violence as a way of responding to the oppression. And thereby, the act of violence is a liberation, is a form of liberation of the person being oppressed. Exactly. Yeah. And then that became like the basis of all the guerrilla movements in Africa.
Yeah, I thought sometimes the guerrilla movement are forced into the violence because the colonial power doesn't want even to change.
Exactly. But the problem is that's one thing.
Yeah.
But what Fanon is saying is that is the mechanism and the method to take power, is to use violence as purgative violence. And this is what was used with the Black Panther. This is what we use in the civil rights to destroy the civil rights movement in the United States. The purgative violence approach infiltrated the Panthers. Stokely Carmichael, who was an FBI operative, and this is what was used. I know from firsthand experience. I don't want to get into it.
So how is the civil rights movement would have succeeded without violence, other part of the violence? If the violence that the radical group didn't evolve, or they were not involved in this civil rights movement, how will the civil rights movement achieve its objectives?
The civil rights movement functioned on the basis of passive resistance.
Passive resistance, yeah.
Right, and the idea was to change the population, not create a violent versus, the Gandhi approach. This was Gandhi's approach, and it worked in India. This was Martin Luther King's approach.
Gandhi approach work with the civilized, civilized. If you're dealing with civilized people, like who respect the human right, they're not gonna kill you. Yeah, we can debate peacefully. We're not gonna kill each other. But if you're dealing with a government who's willing to kill you, how are you gonna approach them to deal with them in a civil right movement? Because when he's trying to get serious, we're gonna bring into the law.
That's what he did with the British. That's what he did with the British. The British were willing to kill people. They killed a lot of Indians, but he did it that way.
With the globalists who are willing to kill how many 6 billion people, how are we going to deal with them in a
No, I'm not talking about that. Okay, I'm talking about an actual movement that was being very successful in the United States was derailed in part by a combination of the Vietnam War and this violent thing that was introduced into the black population by black nationalists who were following in the footsteps of Frantz Fanon. Because okay, let me explain. King's view of liberation, King's view was that if the black population had become complacent and to acceptance of their status, okay, and thereby they needed to become empowered with a force that they can make the changes. And then once they did that, the white people would say, oh, the black population is not what we thought they were. And thereby, they're more like us. They're willing to stand up for their rights. They're willing to suffer being attacked. But, and then that's used to organize more. It's a martyr principle. But the point is that works. That worked in that situation, because you're struggling to create a sense of conscience, of justice, of what have you. Whereas what happened with the black nationalists is they said, well, we're going to have our own nation. You're not where? Texas, Arizona, you know, I was there. I was there with one of the leaders of the Black Panthers who ran their security operation. He was hiding out in my apartment, my mother's apartment, and he turned out to be an FBI operative. But they were running this violent thing to essentially prevent, because what King did at the end of his life in '68 when he was killed, he went for the economic aspect. He went after the Vietnam War as a colonial racist thing, and then he went for the economics. And King had established himself as a moral conscience. As a moral conscience, a moral force. And that's what Gandhi did in India. He established, and they finally killed him because he wasn't going to let Pakistan and he wasn't going to let India split into two. But the point I'm getting at is that's where power lies. It doesn't lie in killing and being killed and in killing and being killed. It lies in creating a moral power. Like the Christians did under Rome. They suffered a lot, but they created a moral power. Am I making any sense?
I'm thinking Washington right now. Why would you follow that philosophy?
Well, I understand where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from. But that's what our New York principle is. It's to create a moral power, a moral sense.
I got it.
Yeah, that's what it is. Because yeah.
Star Wars.
Okay.
Is this still going?
Yes.
Oh,
okay, yeah.
Making points. Evil, good evil.
All right. You need to edit this. This has not been a good day. Or maybe they'll see that and laugh. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to end it there. Okay. Does people have any more questions? Anybody has?
I want to make one more point. I'm drawing a connection now with the, because there's this stupid talk, and I hate to say it, Martin O'Malley was saying climate change is responsible for terrorism, for ISIS, for the rise of ISIS.
He said that?
Yes, he did.
Poor guy.
Yeah.
He's going down.
Yeah. And he's, and he said it a while ago, but I see other people like are actually bringing it up now, and like it really, that is a really overpowering psychological effect of this climate change.
Yeah, it's a disrupt. It creates a depression. All this stuff is very depressing.
It's hopeless.
It's totally depressing.
You talk to climate change activists, like, where there is no solution as far as they're concerned. Like, there is no solution except to deindustrialize. So, like, they're not even, like,
thinking of a solution.
No, there is no.
There is no solution.
On-
There is no solution. There is no solution.
There is no solution.
Therefore,
It's anti-science,
Just-
anti-humanity.
No, just let it happen. This is all meant to happen. And furthermore, and they have their mentality. They don't believe in conspiracy. They don't have an understanding of the power structure of the world. They're very naive. They think it's just about resources and that's it. They have this overriding blind spot that makes them think that all of the destruction and the greed and ISIS and all of these things just happen. They have this idea that this is the natural consequence of our behavior. This is the natural consequence of human beings evolving on the planet.
I don't want to go to one of those but I would like to meet one just to.
come out with us. You'll meet him. You'll meet him.
Here's the thing
Wow.
that I've learned from being in discussion with you guys, like scientists are human beings, and they study. If they want to make a power plant that withstands X, Y, and Z, then they will study to do so. And that's the creative process behind science.
Yeah. On a footnote, we did go up to O'Malley recently, like in the last couple days, on the 28 pages. I think, and he said, we want you to read this. This is the British and the Saudis. This is the 28 pages. This is what you have to read. We have to get this out. You better, are you going to read it? He says, yes, I'm Irish.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Irish.
Anyhow, I feel that, he might be malleable. I don't know. But Bernie Sanders has gone all out on FDR.
Mally's now.
Bernie Sanders has gone all out on FDR now. FDR is his socialism. That's what he's saying. FDR is my socialism.
Is attacking
Is
you
it-
or is
Which, well, it's got problems because FDR was not a socialist.
yeah, okay.
But all the conservatives think FDR was a socialist. So
They went back to comedy.
He was Democrat first.
yeah.
No, he's American system.
Yeah.
That's what he was.
Reagan was Republican, right?
Yeah.
Communists don't like FDR.
No, they think he was one of them, the capitalists, and the only reason they was to stop a communist revolution. That's their view.
It's just funny that the communists, it's such a Bernie Sanders fan, but Ron like that, but David Ron.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
To send him a link on that.
Yeah, actually, yeah. In his speech, it's at Georgetown University. It's really good. Very good.
Yeah, you can send me that.
Yeah,
Might I suggest that you put this one publicly?
I did.
Oh,
On Facebook.
yeah, because it's rare. Yeah. I mean, I've been on Facebook. I have to. I mean, I could sign up or whatever, and just listen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a kind of possibility.
Okay. What's your Facebook?
It's art, so now I've got to.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. My name is So I'll find you and then I'll put you on the.
No, that's not that great. Yeah.
No,
Sorry, I'm not here.